Hello and welcome to Windows in Time, Mining the Archives, Recent Discoveries Among the Glass Negatives, presented by Jackson County Library Services and the Southern Oregon Historical Society. I am Leah Pastizo, Digital Services Specialist. This program is being recorded. Please mute your microphone and turn off your camera to ensure quality recording. There will be a time to answer your questions at the end of the program. Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Shasta, Tacoma, and Lakawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, as well as of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and Modoc Nation, who were forced to relocate to Oklahoma. We take this moment to recognize the indigenous peoples whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for Indigenous peoples, and we encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. And now I'll hand it over to Larry.
Good morning and welcome to Windows in Time. Tonight's speaker is Ben Truwe. Ben has been with us many times before. He has been working lately on a tremendous collection of glass plate negatives, and that inspires the talk today. Windows in Time, Mining the Archives, Recent Discoveries Among the Glass Negatives. Ben?
Thank you, Larry. So yes, it's true. I cannot tell a lie. I'm Ben Truwe. The beard is real. The confidence is not. I'm a little apprehensive about the talk because I thought I knew what I wanted to say and the pictures I wanted to show of the glass negatives I've been scanning for the last couple of years. But it turns out what I wanted to say and show is about 3 hours worth. So I spent the last couple of weeks desperately whittling it down, and I'm not sure what I'm going to be presenting is intelligible at all. If you're interested in Southern Oregon history, I have about 1,200 pages of history on this site, covering maybe 1,000 different topics of Southern Oregon history. Please come into the Southern Oregon Historical Society Research Archive. We're a public archive. We're open to the public. Anyone for any reason can come in and see any of the hundreds of thousands of photos and documents we have. And or you can write us at library@sohs.org if you want to purchase high-resolution scans of these images or by publication rights. So you may have heard about the grant the Society received to digitize the Britt negatives. This is what they look like at the archive, lovingly preserved in these very expensive gray acid-free boxes. That project is in progress. That's not what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about my project, which is scanning the orphan negatives stored in these very cheap plywood boxes, sitting on a shelf at the Society, unloved, unaccessioned, uncatalogued, unindexed, unprinted, unviewed for over 50 years. No one knew what was in these boxes. We do now. I've scanned them all. One of the boxes I've started to call Britt's Greatest Hits, because in this box, among other things, are the original negatives for Britt's first successful expedition to Crater Lake in 1874. And when I'm scanning these negatives, I'm holding the very piece of glass Peter Britt loaded into his wagon in Jacksonville, hauled to the rim of Crater Lake, coated with an emulsion on the rim of the lake, exposed it while it was still damp, and developed it while it was still damp. It's called the wet plate process. And this is the way that first image of Crater Lake has come down to us. This is the paper print. Not great. This is what it looks like when you scan the negative. Similarly, here's another print from 1874. This is the negative. I'm going to be going through these very rapidly. I don't have a lot of time. I wasn't successful. I was cutting the talk down very much. This will be put on YouTube, and you can pause and slow my talk down. Here's another print. That's little Emil Britt with his legs dangling over the precipice, and this is what the negative looks like. Similarly, well, Also, in a different box is this image, which is a mystery. This is an ambrotype. You see an ambrotype, it's an earlier photographic process than the wet plate process. You think ambrotypes, you think 1850s, 1860s. This is Crater Lake, probably from the 1850s or 60s. Well, we know that Peter Britt went to Crater Lake in 1868, and we know he took his photographic equipment. He came back and said and considered this trip unsuccessful. And forevermore, we've been thinking that he didn't bring any successful pictures of Crater Lake. I think he did. If you look at this closely, you can see the far Mount Hills are painted in. And the story is that the clouds didn't lift for him to get a good image. I think this is the first picture of Crater Lake. I'll never be able to prove it, but you'll never be able to prove me wrong. Similarly, here's the famous print of the Broom Brigade girls. This is the full image. This is an awful print. It's obviously several generations removed from the original, and this is what the original looks like. The full image, the toll gate at the Dollar Hide Toll Road. And now that we have the negative, you can zoom in. You can actually read the rates for the various rigs and livestock going over the toll road. And you can zoom in on the individual people. I was excited to find the original negative of this famous portrait of Indian Jenny posing in her burial robe. I've long had the theory that this is not Jenny, because Indian Jenny was in her mid-60s. And this woman does not look to me like she's in her mid-60s. Sadly, if you turn it over, the face has been pretty severely retouched, so you can never tell exactly how wrinkled this woman was. But Britt didn't retouch her hand, which doesn't say mid-60s mid-60s hand of a woman who's spent a really hard life exposed to the elements. To me, again, we'll never know. And I found the negative for one of our local Indian butchers, Colonel Charles S. Drew. And I suspect that Britt might have been doing a little editorial comment when he took Britt's portrait, because Drew is the only person who came into Britt's gallery with his own personal squadron of flies. There are 4 flies on his tunic. So it poses the question, did Drew walk around with in a cloud of vermin, or did Britt introduce the flies hoping they'd land on Drew, or is it simply a coincidence? Again, we'll never know. I have my ideas. Found a couple negatives of Jin Lin, our famous Chinese entrepreneur. If you zoom in on his face, one shaved, one unshaved, and look at his hair, you can see that the hair is the same. He shaved at the Britt House to get these 2 images. And others, without looking at the paper prints, we now have the original negatives of John Barnum, 1893, the youngest railroad conductor in the world. This is Pat Ryan, the merchant P.J. Ryan. This is a rabbit. This woman looks familiar. We haven't been able to place her yet. That's one of the Noonan kids. That's Charles Noonan. The cane he's holding, we'll be seeing a lot of. That's not his cane, that's Britt's cane. It's a prop in the Britt Gallery. So there's the same cane. This is a guy named Charles Funk in his Order of the Eastern Star getup. I think this woman has been tentatively identified. I didn't look her up. Of course, that's Indian Mary and her daughters. And near the box of Britt's greatest hits is this box, which, as you can tell from the label put on it 50 years ago, it's absolutely worthless, broken, no value. And Jan and I had a lot of fun assembling them, because it's no value, because it was a half to maybe a third full of broken glass, which we pieced together. And it turns out it is of value. This is Frank Bybee posing in his homemade soldier's uniform and his father's Knights of Columbus sword. This is Hattie Jackson. And now that we have the negative, we can zoom in on Hattie, zoom in on the album she's holding, rotate it. And Jan, who just came in, our archivist, is a facial identification savant. And she identified these as Hattie's parents, William and Permelia Thompson. Similarly, this woman is posing with a portrait, and Jan recognized this as, oh, that's Mrs. Farmer. We looked it up, and yes, there's Mrs. Farmer. Don't know who this woman is, but she looks an awful lot like Mrs. Farmer. So is she posing with a portrait of her younger self or a sister? We may be able to find that out eventually. Great portrait of a young Chinese guy with a cigar. Britt took a picture of the Ish plot in Jacksonville Cemetery, probably shortly after the stone was installed. You can see he's artfully draped ivy around the stone. This is Charles Schumpf, Amalia Britt, Peter Britt's wife. And this is a great discovery, judging solely from the topography, the vegetation, and these enormous hay barns. I don't see how this can be anything but Fort Klamath. Probably 1874. I don't think we know the route they took after seeing the lake in 1874. I need to look that up. Unidentified. This guy's unidentified, but he looks familiar. So if anyone out there in internet land knows who he is, please let us know. She's unidentified. Peekaboo. This is also unidentified. It's not a Brit, obviously. Brit would never take a picture like this. No background, no fancy chairs. And Brit was an artist, a painter. He wouldn't have been so clumsy in adding detail to this guy's folds, to the folds of his shirt. This is also an ambrotype, so you're thinking 1850s, 1860s. I don't know anything about these guys. I'm hoping someone out there will be able to enlighten me. But it's probably an important image to somebody. I'm thinking maybe southwestern USA. I don't know. Another image, this is also in the box of broken glass, and someone had, I can only conclude that someone at the library must have broken this, swept all these tiny little pieces up and put them in an envelope and hidden it in this box of broken glass where no one would ever find it and they'd never be found out. And this may be identifiable as well. You've got this naked hill in the background, which says to me, maybe Klamath County. There aren't very many naked hills like that in Jackson County. Please let me know if you can identify it. There are houses in the background, so this isn't an isolated farmhouse. It's a neighborhood up against this hill. Don't know anything about the photographer. That might be her hat. You can see her friend has a roll film camera. Glass negatives and nitrate roll film negatives coexisted for about 20 years, well into the 1920s. One of the great things about having the negatives, you can see the margins of the image where the part you're not supposed to see, the part that's going to be cropped out when the picture is printed and mounted. So you can zoom in on the margin. You can see what people call the head clamp, which has engendered lots of terrible mythology about early photography, some of which I've heard in this very room about people clamped in front of the camera for a minute or 5-minute exposures. That's nonsense. Those kind of exposures were from the very, very first few years of photography. By this time, exposures on a very cloudy day might be 4 seconds, typically more like 1 second. But even in a 1 second exposure, you want someone to hold their head still. The photographer does, because he doesn't want to waste his time or his materials by having someone jiggling and blurring their face. So it was used more as a head rest. And in this picture, you can see none of these people are using head rests. They're just standing there. Another picture of Hattie Jackson, whom we saw earlier, posing with a picture of her parents. And this is great. You really get a view into the Britt house, the Britt gallery. Look up at the ceiling. You can see cracks on the ceiling. There are paintings hanging on the wall. Over to the left, there's one of the headrests and pictures on the wall. There's another headrest and more pictures on the wall. And the reason there are pictures on the wall is the reason I haven't called it the Britt Studio. This is the Britt Gallery. No one in the 19th century called it a studio. The word was gallery. And the way they operated was people would get dressed in their finest, go to church, and afterwards they'd go look at the pictures at the gallery. This was 19th century entertainment. And if Britt was lucky, they'd drop $1 or $2 and get their picture took while they're all dressed up. Now we have so many pictures of the Britt house and the Britt grounds, hundreds of images from the 1860s to the 1940s, going into Emil Britt's acetate and nitrate negatives. It's a PhD dissertation for someone who wants to make sense of all these images. Zooming way in on this image, you can see it's open. The gallery is open for business. The gallery extended to the porch. This is a mysterious image. I have copies of this picture here. Chances are good this is Britt's cabin. We know he had a cabin up in the Upper Rogue somewhere, but he had lots of pieces of property. This suggests to me, and other newspaper references do, that this might be on his piece of property, which was at the intersection of Nick Young Road and Agate Road. So if you're going up that way, take a photocopy and take a photograph of the hills. If you can get the hills to align the way they are in this picture, you've found the site of the Britt cabin. Please do that for me. Zooming in on this image, you can see Peter Britt's coat and probably Emil's coat over the railing there, and Peter Britt's camera box stenciled PB. About half the images, half the negatives in these boxes were taken by this guy, Robert Vinton Beall Jr. No, I did not mispronounce it. You might be familiar with Bell Lane in Central Point, major artery over there. That's the pronunciation. They were a Scots family, and they were adamant about people spelling and pronouncing their name correctly. So please, Bell Lane, pronounce it like an Oregonian. This is Vinty. This is a paper print of him at the age of 22 in Effingham, Illinois, going to the Illinois College of Photography. Vinty, at the age of 8, contracted spinal meningitis and was profoundly deaf ever after. So that's one of the reasons he got interested in the visual arts. There's another print in Illinois. Here he is in the photo studio at the College of Photography. He's in the center holding up something. If you zoom in, he's holding a self-portrait, which we have a copy of in the archive. He spent it so that was 1900. In 1901, he was a photographer in New Orleans. 1902, he came back to this house in Southern Oregon. This is the Bell House on Bell Lane. And in the front is the Bell Walnut Tree, which is today the enormous Bell Walnut Tree. The house is still standing. A lot of Bell's negatives are in the original envelopes, which he would use for scratch paper to communicate with his sitters. When will they be done? I'm in no hurry, etc. A lot of them were not in envelopes, and it looked like they'd been stored in the barn on the Bell place, apparently, for 50 years, happily with the glass side up, but they were covered with Bell Farm. And in order to scan them, I would have to scrape central point off the negatives and then polish the remainder and then just put it on the glass plate of the scanner and scan it. And most of what is left to us in these boxes is portrait work, but he took some great views, including this one, which doesn't look like much. But Bell has some really extraordinary lenses. Zooming in on this, you can see that this is Central Point, as seen from the Bell Ranch. Is that astounding? You'll never see this kind of focus on a Britt print. And it's really embarrassing that no one has done the work on Central Point history, that we cannot interpret what we see here. I think that must be Haskell Amy's house, the 2-story house on the left. I have no idea whose enormous barn that is. That barn must be in history somewhere. That's amazing. Zooming or panning off to the right, that building in the center has to be the Snowy Butte packing house for Snowy Butte Orchards. We know they had an enormous packing house. We know it was by the railroad tracks. This building has windows like a packing house, so that must be that. Then way off to the right in the grove of the trees, it's the cupola of the Central Point School. This is the school that predates the 1906 brick school. This is the only picture of what I assume are the operations on the Bell Ranch. It's hard to locate where harvest pictures were taken because very few harvest pictures taken in the Rogue Valley. You can see hills in the background because it was just normal for the hills to be obscured with smoke. Our smoky summers are smoky summers in the Rogue Valley. There's always been a forest fire somewhere. This is nothing new. So zooming in, you can see that the horses, this is a horse-powered hay baler. The horses are going around and turning that capstan, which powers the baler. And something I'd never noticed in a hay baling picture before, there are scales at the end of the baler, which makes perfect sense. They sold hay by the ton. Another picture taken at the Bell House. That's Bell Lane crossing the railroad tracks. And this has to be Asbury Bell, who would have been Vinty Bell's cousin once removed, showing off his brand new buggy with the ultra-modern wired wheels and balloon tires. If you have a fancy new rig, you need a beautiful horse to pull it. They were just as nuts about their rigs back then as people are now. And his horse, sadly, is wearing what's called a check strap. It goes from the belly band up to the bridle and serves no other purpose than to force him to hold his head upright so he looks pretty. Not a kind thing to do if he's pulling a heavy load, probably not so much an imposition on a rig this light. Near the Bell Ranch was Snowy Butte Orchards, and this is John Olwell, who owned it with his brothers, the Olwell brothers, and he was the manager of the Olwell Ranch, the Snowy Butte Orchards, posing with whom I assume is his wife, Ina Ray, well, her name was Ina Ray. Ina Ray Olwell. She was the daughter of Charles Ray of Gold Ray Dam fame. And you can see from John Olwell's tan that he was a hands-on guy, and this might be him with his hands on. I think that might be him standing to the left of center. And these guys are digging a ditch, which can only be a tributary ditch for what's now known as the Hopkins Canal, which is the Fish Lake ditch on the Rogue River Valley floor is called the Hopkins Canal. And this is how you move dirt in the 19th century. This team, you can tell from the angle of the tugs that it's pulling a plow. That's how you loosened up dirt. Then you actually moved it with what the guy has his foot on, which is called a Fresno scraper. It's just a scoop. And this is how you move dirt. This is how you built a road. This is how you dug the foundation for a building in the horse and buggy days. 10 years later, they'd be using a bulldozer. Vinty did advertising work for Snowy Butte Orchards. This is a picture of the Snowy Butte apple orchard. And we know it's Snowy Butte because we have the glass negative. You can zoom in on one of the boxes and read that it says Olwell Brothers, Central Point, Oregon. And this is an apple orchard, not a pear orchard. This is probably 1904, 1906, that general time scale. This would be probably a Newtown Pippin apple orchard. Just when pears this transition to pears had started. Snowy Butte Cookhouse. And this is the only picture of Vinty's that has come down to us that was taken in Medford. This is the Rogue River Creamery, which opened in 1904. It looks, that cloth awning looks brand new, so that probably dates this picture. This sat on the site of the Red Lion, whatever the Red Lion is calling itself these days. And I could use a little help on this because looking off to the right, what is this guy carrying in his buggy? It's not any kind of cream separator I've ever seen. If you know, please write in and let me know. He took an important series of pictures of the construction of Gold Ray Dam in August and September of 1902. This one is important largely because If you zoom way in, you can see on the other side of the dam is Big Bar on the Rogue River. On the top part of the screen, that gravel bar is Big Bar, the site of what they called an Indian battle in 1854. Like most battles, it was pretty one-sided and doesn't merit the name. And then on the other side of Big Bar is the site of Takelma, the Indian village of Takelma. This picture was taken a few weeks later, and you can, looking down on the same site, you can see that there's a rectangular impoundment where the water is calm. And then looking up on the image, way off in the distance, is this brush-covered arbor, which at the moment Vinty snapped his shutter was chock full of dignitaries dedicating this construction site. So that dates this picture September 1st, 1901. This is also September 1st, and we can zoom in on that shack and see that there's a dynamo, there's a generator. That's not a water-powered generator, that's a steam-powered generator. They didn't have a lot of time to work while the water level was low, so they actually illuminated the site electrically with electric lights and worked at night. Here's a picture taken some weeks later. You can see in the very center of the image progress on the log crib dam. This was the first iteration of Goldbrae Dam. The structure was logs, crisscross tinker toil style. And you can see that little shack, there's activity there. There's steam coming out off to the right. There's water cascading. They're obviously pumping the water out of that impoundment so they can do site work. Where's the steam coming from? You can see the boiler is way off to the left. I don't know why. Maybe they wanted to keep the fire away from the log crib dam, or maybe they're operating other stuff with steam. Don't know. Great picture of a baseball game, which again puts the lie to the story about 1 minute long exposures. You can tell from the way the action is frozen, Vinty was using a mechanical shutter, exposure probably something like 1/10 of a second. Don't know who these guys are or who this house is. Don't know who these kids are either. Could likely be Vinty's nephews, and this might be his sister, Mary Bell, who married Charlie Strang. And there she is again. And this is the same woman. And this gives us our opportunity to identify the location this picture was taken and maybe identify those kids and this woman. Because there's only one place in the Rogue Valley where the hills line up exactly like that. If you're going out to Central Point, take one of these printouts, take a picture for me of the hills lining up like that, and maybe we'll be able to identify for sure who these people are. Took a great sequence of pictures up in the mountains. In the summer, people would go to one of the resorts or go up to Huckleberry Mountain just to escape the heat. On Huckleberry, they'd pick berries and shoot deer and feed themselves, have a gay old time. Vinty might have been with this group of people because he took several images of this party and this camp. This little girl on the left appears in this image, I guess, of the full party. There she is in the center of the image. Panning off to the right, you can see there's a deer draped over a horse and a guy standing to the left. The same deer, you can compare the antlers, appears in this image. Maybe he picked up a few bucks when he was up there and took an image of these guys. We don't know, but it was common for photographers to cruise the campsites of the people rusticating who had nothing else to do than get their picture took and make a few dollars. Maybe that's what Vinty was doing up there on Huckleberry. Couple great pictures of what I assume are Klamath women. We know the Klamath Indians would go pick berries too. That's where the white people were, how the white people found out about Huckleberry Mountain, I'm sure. This is a great portrait. This woman knows what she's thinking. And I suspect that this woman got herself gussied up for the portrait because the Gibson girl hairdo is very stylish for the time, but I don't think it would hold together bouncing around on a horse for very long. So getting into Vinty's portrait work, he had obviously had time to kill. He spent time experimenting with his signature, how he would sign his paper prints, photographers had distinctive ways to mark their prints. Although I don't think we've ever found a print with his signature, have we, Jan? No. And had time to kill, took a lot of pictures of his mother. This is Anne Maria Riddle Bell. She was a Riddle, and I think she might have been an unwilling subject, or so I thought until I found this image. And this is his father, Robert Vinton Beall Sr., posed on the porch of the Bell house. This the fancy screen door also appears in the earlier picture of the house we saw. And he's posing with a puppy, probably unwillingly. He doesn't look like a happy camper. A series of photos of this woman who's identified. Her name is Centena Rothermel. And in 1903, she was the woodman's queen of some event in Grants Pass. And you can see, you know, just the extraordinary lengths Vinty would go to get a good portrait. You'll never see a Britt portrait lit this way, lit from above, lit from the sides, and he also has a reflector of some kind to just add, to fill in the near side of her face from below. Just extraordinary camera work. Vinty actually built a studio on the Bell farm, and it was a studio. It wasn't a gallery. He had skylights, he had side lights, and obviously he had reflectors too. You'll never see a Britt portrait posed like this. Britt was a 19th century photographer, an excellent 19th century photographer. Bell was a 20th century photographer, using all the tools available to him, but not electricity. This is all done with natural light, just using it, getting it from different directions, bouncing it where he wanted it. I can picture him scurrying up and adjusting her train and scurrying back behind the camera. It's extraordinary. And a lot of pictures of this guy. So the pictures are all mixed together. I keep running across this guy and I'm getting tired of looking at his smug face. And then I start thinking, hey, didn't he have a mustache? Yes, he did. And you compare the tie. Again, like Jin Lin, same day, he shaved at the Bell house. And I was really proud of figuring this out. And then much later, I found this image. Yes. Bell did a lot of kid photography, much greater percentage than Britt did. He had a hard time getting this little spud to hold still. And I can't look at this guy without thinking of Popeye's nephew, Sweet Pea. But he had strategies to get kids to hold still. He'd give them something to hold on to. Same tee set, same angle of the head. Or he'd have them hold on to something, which worked brilliantly. Or with little kids, he'd balance them in a precarious position, which didn't work quite so well, but he did get a picture. He took several images of this kid who's unidentified, but I'm using him as an example of Bell's retouching. A pretty ordinary looking kid, but with retouching, he turns him into a young god. Just extraordinary difference. And he apparently had so much time on his hands. He would, even on the standing portraits, like those pictures of Centena Rothermel in the with the long train, on the negative, her face is smaller than a postage stamp. And Vinty would retouch that. He would, very carefully retouch her cheeks, leave her eyes in focus, and even the hands. It's just extraordinary lengths he went to. He was a real artist. I tried to get pictures of what the retouching looked like. You would actually bruise the emulsion, not remove any emulsion, but bruise it. It transmitted the same amount of light, but didn't transmit the detail. And there are orphan negatives. I was really excited and really proud of myself to identify this. This was taken by A.C. Allen. This is a still shot from Grace's visit to Rogue River Valley, the oldest movie we have shot in the Rogue River area. In 1915, this is the Medford Redman's Lodge reenacting, or they thought they were reenacting what an Indian battle looked like. Also in these boxes is this orphan. This is a picture taken by Frank Hull, pretty famous image, but now we have the negative. We're standing on Main Street in Medford, look the other side of the railroad tracks, looking east towards Roxanne, looking east towards Bear Creek. And again, Hull had pretty amazing lenses. We can go in and we can walk down the north side of Main Street. That oval in the center of the frame, that was above the harness shop. Above the harness shop sign. That harness shop was on the site of the Hubbard's Hardware building, which would be built 2 years after this picture was taken. The other side of the street, there's the train depot, the Nash Hotel. That building way in the distance is the Childers House, which in 1907 was the depot for the Pacific and Eastern Railway. That house is sitting on the other side of the creek on the site of Bear Creek Park. Hawthorne Park, excuse me. So getting back into Britt negatives, this is a self-portrait, of course, with Britt with camera and paintbrush. And we have so many pictures of Jacksonville taken from the Britt house. Again, one of you needs to volunteer, come into the library, date these pictures. We know a lot about the individual buildings, so we know when they went up. You can, just by seeing what building is in what picture, you can at least put a range of dates to pictures, and we could have them in order and use them as reference. So many pictures taken from the Britt house. This is one of the few Brits that you can actually zoom into and get stuff out of it. Like the building on the left, the long building on the left, that's on the site of the U.S. Hotel. On the upper right-hand corner of this image, zooming in on that strange structure in the center of the frame, that's Peter Feely's brick kiln, making the bricks that go to build some of downtown Jacksonville. This is a view from the cupola of the courthouse, so it's after 1883, probably not much long after. This view is also taken from the cupola about 7 years later, 6 or 7 years later. Zooming in on this image, there's the Britt house. To the right of that is Veet Schutz's brewery on California Street. And you can see circus posters, old circus posters on Fifth Street, and the tracks of the Rogue River Valley Railway, which hadn't been ballasted yet. So this picture is winter of 1890, 1891. The railway is brand new. And then way in the distance you can see steaming away is the little locomotive that's come down to us as the Jacksonville Cannonball or the peanut roaster or the tea kettle, which has now been returned to Jacksonville and it's on the hill there. This is a view, I guess, from the other side of the cemetery, and zooming in on this isn't all that productive, but you can see this little white spot in the oval. That's the Hanley house peeking out from behind the willow tree. And to the right of that is the barn, which would subsequently be dismantled and reassembled off to the left next to the creek, and is still standing there today, built in the 1850s. This picture was taken March 27th, 1885. We know that because Britt happily wrote down the date. Of course, that's the Redmond building and Kubley building in downtown Jacksonville. Same day, he turned the camera around and took this picture, which the negative has not survived very well, but by fiddling with the exposure, you can get some detail from the center of the image. This is what we people call the Beekman Bank, but please note it does not say bank anywhere on it. This was the express office. That's how most people thought of it. Britt did his private investment there and bought gold there, but this was the express office, not bank, any kind of banking we would recognize. And another reason we think this is the same day is because this feller, Charlie Nickel, appears in both images, dressed the same. It's unfortunate that it doesn't survive very well, but happily a paper print does. We're on Oregon Street now, viewing the arrival of the Rogue River Valley Railway. There's the tea kettle there pulling in. And I was hoping that this would be the first day of operation, but then I noticed the telegraph sign, well as the Western Union telegraph sign on the depot, which is still there. They've rotated it 90 degrees and now it's the visitor center in Jacksonville. But the telegraph wasn't connected, until March of 1891. So this is just a normal day, commuters waiting at the depot to commute into Medford. This is a famous image. We now have the negative. These are the Jacksonville volunteer firemen. They're posing with rifles because they're going to be the security guards for the hanging of Lewis O'Neill a few blocks away, March 12th, 1886. Also Oregon Street, 4th of July. Every 4th of July would have a float with the young women of the community posing in fancy costumes as the Princess of Peace, the Goddess of Liberty, sometimes Columbia and other allegorical figures. So this picture is dateable. Every 4th of July, there would be long descriptions of the parade and naming the people. So this could be identified if someone would come into the library and do it, so I don't have to. Same place. It's a great picture of the Jacksonville Silver Cornet Band. Look at that guy. Another picture of the band. This picture also could be identified because you can see you can see a skyline, you can see houses in the background. You could figure out which lot this picture was taken on. And we know the date because just coincidentally, I was flipping through Peter Britt's notebooks, and there's a picture. There's a notation: house and band. So we know that picture was taken June 3rd, 1887. If we knew which house it was, we might be able to identify the people standing in the doorway there. I'd sure like to identify this house. I don't even know if it's Jacksonville or Medford. It would be important to know because it's on the porch of this house that these adorable Chinese kids are posing. We might be able to identify them. And this may be the most important discovery in all these boxes, this image, which is so mysterious. Britt didn't do house calls, but this must be a Britt. Maybe Emil Britt took it. Jan has identified a couple of these girls as Jacksonville girls, so we know it is a Jacksonville picture, but it puts the lie to this myth that Black people in Southern Oregon were universally treated with revulsion and disgust. It's such an intimate picture. The love is palpable. We don't know what's going on here. I guess it's she's running some kind of a daycare. We can get a little more information by fiddling with the exposure. You can see there's a woman standing in the back. Did she think she was going to show up, or is she hiding from the camera? We don't know. Off to the right is a stovepipe, so the place is heated. Not every house in Jacksonville was. And there's a bird cage hanging from the ceiling. So it seems to be a relatively prosperous household. And the only other clue we have on this image is in the corner, there's a fingerprint. Someone needs to come in and volunteer and put together sets of fingerprints for Peter and Emil Britt so we can identify their pictures. And that's my time, I think.